will first hear Ana Cláudia Romano Ribeiro, and it's my great pleasure to welcome my friend Ana Cláudia, this long-distance traveler, from the now Federal University of São Paulo. After a master's degree in anthropology at the University of Paris-Nanterre in France, and after years of research in various utopian fictions, Dr. Romano Ribeiro defended her doctorate on the 16th century French utopia, La Terre Australe Connue, by Gabriel de Foigny, which she translated into Brazilian Portuguese with the title A Terra Austral Conhecida. Okay? Yeah. Dr. Romano Ribeiro is the co-editor of the above-mentioned journal Morus, and one of the managers of the research center Utopias at the University of Campinas in São Paulo. She does not shy from tackling texts in Latin, in French, in Italian, on top of her native Brazilian Portuguese. And today she will try her newly acquired English to speak to you about, to interest you in her current study on Thomas More's Utopia, which she has just translated into Brazilian Portuguese. So prepare your ears for a real symphony of words, as Dr. Romano Ribeiro will talk to you about translating the figures of sound from Utopia's first book into Brazilian Portuguese. Up to you, Ana Cláudia.
Thank you very much for your very kind presentation. I had never been interested in the Latin text of Thomas More's Utopia, published in 1560, and I had always read its translations. In 2002, I took up the study of French utopias of the 16th and 17th centuries, and became curious about the text with which all French utopias seemed to dialogue at a time when Latin was still the lingua franca of the literate circles. This eventually led me to translate the Latin version of the Utopia into Brazilian Portuguese. What was my surprise when I found out a musical text full of sound features that were missing in translations, which seemed to emphasize the spirit rather than the letter. That separation between form and meaning, however, is not consistent with Utopia's actual wording, in which, as noted by Edward Surtz, and as it happens with all great literary works, the expression is molded by the ideas, and the idea seems to be reciprocally influenced by the expression. It should also be remembered that Juan Luis Vives, in 1523, recommended reading the Utopia for both the use of language and for its subject. In fact, one of the least studied aspects of the Utopia is precisely the specificity of the Latin in which it was written, its style, its peculiarities. This gap, already highlighted by Surtz in 1967, prevails as observed by Clarence Miller in 2011. I understand style here in quite a general way, as described by Surtz in his article from 1967. I quote, "The selection and the arrangement of words and phrases." Literature on the Latin of the Libellus Aureus is so rare that it can be listed very, very quickly. Well, I will not list these works. I am to present here some of the figures of sound, the expression is by Surtz, of Book 1 of the Utopia, compare them to the published translations, 2 Brazilian ones and the latest Portuguese translation, and then suggest my own translation. I assume that the form and especially the sound mechanisms of the Latin text result from the idea that wants to be communicated and at the same time reinforce it, as observed by Surtz. Therefore, it is important to try to translate them so as not to neglect these aspects of More's wit. The figures of sound mentioned by Surtz are figures of repetition. That is to say, they are the repeated placement in the discourse of a phrasal part that had already been employed. These repeated figures hold the flow of information and give the reader more time to emotionally enjoy the information presented as important. In Book 1 of Utopia, they are usually inserted within short periods, typical of the Utopia, which, as you may remember, was written in dialogic form. Virtually, all of it is made up by Raphael Hythlodeus' speeches, who only twice uttered long sentences in Book 1, quite long in fact, and called marathon sentences by Clarence Miller. We agree with Searles when he states that the dearth of long, complex, formal periodic sentences corresponds to the conversational and familiar nature of the discourse, a feature More shares with Seneca, an author held in high regard by Utopians, together with Cicero, who, according to De Pietro, states explicitly right in a conversational mode in his letter to 75. Translators of the Utopia, such as Marie Delcourt, André Prévost, Georges Logan, and Clarence Miller, point out the varied language used by More. Delcourt even hypothesizes that it is a text of oral nature, dictated by More to his secretary, John Clement, a hypothesis rejected by Aires Nascimento, although he agreed that the pace of the sentence in its variety corresponds to the practice of the court bar, which More, who was a lawyer, used to perfection. The figures of sound certainly contribute to the varied character of Utopia's language, and their presence, according to Prévost, is not surprising for an author particularly sensitive to the virtues of music. This colloquial style of the Utopian text, and even more judgment about it, in his letter to Peter Gillis, in which he evokes the negligent simplicity, neglectam simplicitatem, of his little book, should not lead us to believe that it is a simple text, as Elizabeth McCutcheon notes. On the contrary, the impression of natural and effortless writing is an effect More creates to achieve rhetorical sophistication, one aspect of which McCutcheon studied accurately, that is to say, the use of litotes in her article of 1971. Prévost notes that simplified syntactic structures, as well as modes and tenses that don't follow the uses of the consecutio temporum of classical Latin and seem to reproduce the spontaneity of spoken language, are used side by side with formally more elaborated structures. And to meet the research of his stylistics, he goes to the limits of preciousness and to what is later called in England euphuisme. Let us now analyze some excerpts of Book 1 that feature some patent sound semantic resources according to the translations of L.A. Luis Andrade, translations first published in 1937. It's not known if his translation was based directly on Latin text. And this is Utopia's most reproduced translation in Brazil by several publishers. The Portuguese spelling of that edition was preserved here. Camargo and Cipolla, C.C., who translated George Logan and Robert Adams' English version of 2002. This is Utopia's second most widespread translation in Brazil, although it has admittedly been translated from one of the English translations. I decided to examine it. Aires Nascimento, A.N., translator of the Latin text. This is the latest and most complete edition of the Utopia available in Portugal. And my own translation, R.R., Romano Ribeiro, in progress. The number in parentheses that follows the translated excerpts refers to the page of the above-mentioned editions. In the handout and in light gray, in this text and in handout too, we added two English translations, one by Logan and Adams, quoted above, and other by Clarence Miller, so that non-Portuguese speakers can follow the text. Let us analyze some examples of the figures of repetition found among those asserts called figures of sound. Among these, we focus on those relating to repetition of word parts. I won't fully comment on the translational options, but we only briefly mention some plays of sounds that caught my attention while I was translating. Excerpt 1 was taken from the dialogue between the characters Thomas More, his friend Peter Gillies, and Raphael Hythloday, the Portuguese sailor-philosopher. Peter, after hearing Raphael tell about customs and institutions of several peoples he came across while traveling the world, suggests that such amount of experience would be of high value to a king, who would benefit from his advice, which would result in improved life conditions for Hythloday and his relatives. Raphael replies that his family should not expect to improve its life and at the price of him becoming a servant of kings. After all, he already shared his possessions with them. Well, the wordplay between servitium, seruias, and inseruias is based on a paronomastic organic change that confronts three words with the same root, similar in sound and whose difference in meaning is emphasized by Peter's answer. Lausberg classifies as organic the changes based on linguistic systems, so words are etymologically connected. He defines paronomasia as a wordplay based on the meaning of the words, which arises due to the change of a part of the word body, a process which often corresponds to an almost imperceptible change of the word body, a surprising, that causes strangeness, paradoxical change of the word meaning. L.A. chose an explanatory translation which explains the place of similar sounds transformed into Latin infinitives servire and inservire. The syntagma bona verba was eliminated, as we can see, thus suppressing Hythloday's judgment about Peter's words. But verba is resumed in two Latin words, duas palavras latinas, highlighting the infinitives, calling the reader's attention to the fact that they are Latin words. CC's translation maintains the paronomasia serviços, servidão, services, servitude, and creates another one, compreendo e concordo, I understand, I agree, which is not found in the Latin text. In AN's version, the trio serviço, servir, secundalas seems to be an attempt to translate to some extent the paronomasia by repeating the first letters, se. In my translation, I adopted CC's solution but maintained the singular and the word order of Mor's text. First, the negative form, não seria servidão, then the affirmative clause, mas serviço. I also maintained the original spelling of Peter's name to reveal his origin, Antwerp, in the region of Flanders. The alliteration of verba visum was only maintained by an and rr in the pair palavras parecer. Well, excerpt 2. Excerpt 2 was extracted from a speech by Hythloday in which he reproduces the dialogue between him, a lawyer, and Cardinal Morton. Prior to excerpt 2, we find Hythloday's analysis of the reasons that lead people to steal, the main one being the breeding of sheep that become devourers of men. Landowners, no longer satisfied with their income, turned all their land into sheep pasture, stopped cultivating it, and expelled the peasants. They are the subject of the verbs in the following section. The pair prosint, obsint, two verbs in the third person plural of the present subjunctive, plays with organic changes. The prefixes pro and ob resulting in opposite meanings of a verb formed by the same radical, sum. The first three translations don't maintain the paronomasia, which, through repetition of form, emphasizes the antonymy. Still, in this excerpt, observe the repetition of the first syllable in neu, nisi, the noun and the conjunction. An inorganic change in a pronomesia that emphasizes the difference in meaning. This iteration is maintained in the translations of an, já não, a não ser, and by rr, coisa alguma, coisas. Excerpts 3 and 4 belong to the same reply made by Heiterdey that contains excerpt 2. They discuss the financial aspects of the economic disorders arising from extensive sheep breeding, the concentration of the wool trade in the hands of a few, which keeps prices high regardless of the number of sheep. In this excerpt 3, increscat and decrescit, compound terms similar in form not only have different prefixes, but also differ in tense, third person singular, present subjunctive, and indicative. None of the first three translations preserves the semantic tension of that pronomesia created by sound play in the iteration of the primitive verb crow, cresco. I've tried to maintain it with acrescesse, decresceria. Two parallelisms are found in excerpt 4. First, the sound match between the neutral nouns monopolium, oligopolium, a pronomesia maintained in CC's and AN's translation. The second parallelism formed by the litotes, non potest, and by repeating the primitive verb in potest, sounding like est, possum, sum, was maintained by LA and AN. I tried to preserve both using impossível monopólio, oligopólio possível. Here too, it can be said that the meaning is emphasized by means of repetition, by means of the figures of sound. Excerpt 5, as excerpts 2, 3, and 4, are also part of Heiterdey's long speech in which he recounts the dialogue that took place at a dinner given at Cardinal Morton's home. Taken from a part called comic intermezzo by Prévost, the sentence below involves two characters present at the dinner, a parasite mimicking a jester, and a mendicant friar. It's part of Heiterdey's description of that jester who, when he realizes his success in annoying the friar by comparing him to a vagabond, keeps teasing him. In the end, the fool proves wise and the friar a fool. The repetition of scurra, scurrari, is an etymological figure that produces semantic intensification, throwing light on the character and the actions of the jester. The etymological figure consists, according to Lausberg, of repeating the radical and is used to intensify semantic force, as in speak the speech, vivre la vie, sein Leben leben, etc. It's a type of pronomesia. In LA's, AN's, and RR's translations, the opposition madness, seriousness that runs through the entire Utopia is maintained and produces ironic effects, since Heiterdey's comparison between European countries and others, non-European ones, shows the reader that what some consider wise may be madness and vice versa. However, the etymological figure that emphasizes that contrast was not maintained in LA's, CC's, and AN's translation. Excerpt 6 is also part of Heiterdey's long speech. It refers to the lesson of the Akorian, a people located in the southeast of Utopia, in which Heiterdey describes an exemplary aspect that contrasts with French politics of that time. After experiencing the evils arising from a territorial expansion policy, the king of the Akorian decides to content himself with his current territory. At the end of that excerpt, the Portuguese sailor advises the French king to follow the examples of the Akorian, who loves his people and who is loved by it. So there are two inflectional changes of the word body here, amet, ametur, and suos, a suis. I tried to translate this excerpt maintaining the polyptotons, preserving the repetition of the verb and the possessive pronoun, whose redundancy I believe to be intentionally emphatic. I also choose not to emphasize the fact that the possessive refers to subjects as a meaning that gets clear if one reads the entire former passage, so as to maintain the ambiguity between suos, a suis, which in this excerpt could refer to family members, but also to his children, thus evoking the metaphor of the king as a father and his subjects as his children. CC maintains the repetition of the verb and the alternation between the active and the passive form, but explains the referent of the possessive and doesn't repeat it. The choice of non-repetition, non-variatio, we could call it, seems to generally characterize the translational choices of the first three translators in the examples analyzed so far. Before the next excerpt, number 7. Hythloday imagines counselors meeting to find ways to increase a king's wealth. The first strategy is presented in excerpt 7. Again, in the first three translations, the paronomasia containing the participles eroganda, corroganda in the singular feminine nominative form was not translated. LA and CC maintained the parallelism. Se trate de reembolsar, se trate de tornar a encher, and tiver de fazer algum pagamento, tiver dinheiro a receber. In my translation, I tried to maintain the organic change using the pair desembolsar, embolsar, to disburse, to pocket. The excerpt below is the conclusion of a part of Hythloday's speech in which he reasons that the impossibility of eradication all political mistakes errors should not be a reason to turn away from public life, just as a sheep shouldn't be abandoned because the winds may not be stopped. The two polyptons are found here, omnia omnes and bene boni. The regular rhythm of this excerpt is further reinforced by the alliteration in nam nisi and by the repetition of the verb. LA's translations features an amplificatio, bom e perfeito, good and perfect, instead of bene, following the first English translation of the Utopia, Ralph Robinson's translation, which CC translate bene, boni as perfeitas, perfeição, which takes Utopia closer to Platonic thought, something suggested by More himself in several passages of his book. The polyptotons of that passage are particularly difficult to maintain during the translation. Only LA managed to maintain the same verb, at the price of translating the adverb bene by the adjectives bom e perfeito, good and perfect. I choose to translate omnia by tudo, everything, instead of todas as coisas, all things, my previous choice, which has the same number of syllabs than todos, all, just as the pair omnia, omnes. Translating bene using an adverb forced me to vary sint, translating the first occurrence using estar. I also changed the word order to maintain a rhythm, mutatis mutandis, that is similar to the original. I keep trying to find a more accurate solution in terms of form and sound. In AN's translation, the alliteration of nam, nisi finds a match in não senão. Its phrasing also seems to be closest to the original of the four ones. Excerpt 9 is part of a final passage of Book 1 in which Hitler describes Utopia, where a few laws suffice to manage everything in an exemplary manner, and compares it to other countries, where many laws are made without ensuring a better life. The polyptoton ordinantes ordinatam is formed by two participial forms of the verb ordino, which in context refers to put in order that which refers to a country, including the legal aspect. In my version, I tried to maintain the repeating figure, translating the participle ordinantes into fazendo ordenanças and ordinatam in ordenada. AN created a paronomasia using the pair incessantemente suficientemente. But like LA and CC, he didn't translate the wordplay ordinantes ordinatam. Those examples show us that in the Latin text, the figures of repetition or figures of sound are built using terms of the same family, words derived by means of prefixes, words with inflectional differences, words or even the consecutive repetition of words. Such procedures seem to aim to draw the reader's attention on both of what is said and how it is said, indicating that a semantic tension accompanies these figures of repetition. Of the 9 I listed, 8 are part of Hythlodae's answers, which make up most of Book 1. I aim to translate these and other figures of sound following the assumption that, as already shown by scholars of the Libellus Aureus, such as Edward Surtz and Elizabeth McCutcheon, the form means the devices of sound, judiciously employed, spring from idea and feeling, and at the same time reinforce both, as they should. This is a quotation from Surtz. In continuing that work, I intended to dedicate myself to the way form signifies in the narrative and argumentation of More's Utopia. Thank you very much.